Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Billy Watson TV. It gives me great pleasure to have a returning guest on. It's his fourth time back on the show, and it is the legend that is Mike Williams. How you doing, Mike?
Hi, Billy. I'm doing well. Thank you again for having me back on your show.
That's cool. I know you're busy doing lots of stuff all the time, but I was just last night watching your recent one, the Rolling Stones presentation, so that made me think to reach out to you. I'm a bit of a Stones fan. If actually, I could blame the Stones for my life because I went down to Rolling Stones to see them in Sheffield, and that's where I met my first wife the night before. And
Okay.
it was all downhill from there. Then on, still paying for it. My son's still here torturing me, so I've got a lot to answer for. But anyway, yeah, the Rolling Stones have just decided. Obviously, we've known about the kind of good boys and the bad boys of rock and roll, the Beatles and the Stones. Would you let your daughter marry a Rolling Stone? It was very much an antithesis of the Beatles good guys. And a lot of people say even the Beatles were more working class and the Stones were actually the middle class ones. What made you go down this avenue of looking at the Beatles in a bit more, the Stones in a bit more detail?
Yeah, actually, it was accidental. One of the researchers that is within my network, Vicky, she does the Pepper Time presentations that I put up on my Paul is Dead site. She said, Mike, you should take a look at this DVD, this documentary. It's Muscle Shoals. And it was released back in 2013, so 10 years ago. And Vicky wanted me to watch it because she said it mirrored exactly what the Wrecking Crew was doing. And so I said, okay. So I took a look at it, and on the cover of the DVD, it tells you who they talked to. So they, Keith Richards and Mick Jagger. But I didn't know that there was going to be a segment of the Rolling Stones recording at Muscle Shoals Studio in Alabama, and they were there from December 2nd through December 4th, and they did 3 songs there, one cover, and then they did Wild Horses and Brown Sugar, allegedly, right? They told us that that's where they recorded all 3 of those songs over a span of 3 days tops. Jagger and Keith Richards really say it was a couple of days. So they're telling us it's 2 days, but the dates that we're given is a 3-day stint. And so as I mentioned in the presentation, Billy, whenever I watch these rock documentaries now, forget about whether it's the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, it could be any band, because I know what I know, excuse me, and I know you do too. You do also, that when we watch these things now, we watch it with a discerning ear and a discerning eye, because we know that there's a lot of fictional storytelling that's going on. And when you know this, then you're able to pull that thread, and you're able to shave off all of that fantastical stuff that they want to give us, and we can get down to brass tacks and take a look at the story and say, okay, so if we strip out all of this kind of fairy dust that they sprinkle on it, what's really going on here? And so, it was just on a lark, to be honest. And it's a small, short segment in the documentary. It's about 6 minutes or so, but it's in that 6 minutes, it's packed with a lot of stuff that told me that the Rolling Stones didn't do what they said that they were doing at Muscle Shoals, which was to record 3 songs within a 2-day period of time. Especially when we're told that one of the songs, Wild Horses, was essentially written from scratch, right? So in the documentary, it tells us that Jagger says that he said that Keith had just the chorus, and then Keith says it was just an idea. So basically, writing a blank sheet of paper. And then I did a follow-up video, which was a postscript to that, and which I released last night. And I said, if we just focus on the one song, Wild Horses, forget about Brown Sugar and the cover that they did. I think it was You Got Me. I think that was
You got to move, is it?
You Got to Move, right? Yeah, You Got to Move, right? So even if we strip out, those 2 songs, and we just focus on the one song that we're told that they wrote from scratch, I didn't see any way that they could get that done in 2 days, because 2 days at a studio, that's a flyover. That's
Yeah.
not, settle in and let's get down to some hardcore recording, especially when they're telling us that they had to write the song, they had to rehearse the song, they had to arrange the song, and then they had to record it. And they're telling us that they did that within 2 days. And, when we talk about 2 days, um, some people think in terms of 24 hours in a day, but obviously they weren't there for 24 hours each day either, right?
Yeah.
So another question that I asked was, were they there for 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours? How long were they in the studio? We're never given that information. So I concluded that what was the most likely case, again, in my opinion, is that they went to Muscle Shoals to have some overdubs recorded, and in all likelihood by studio musicians. That what Muscle Shoals already had queued up was, probably most of the song was already recorded. Perhaps it was done in the UK, and the tapes were shipped over to the Muscle Shoals studio in Alabama, and that's what they did. They did overdubs, and maybe it's possible that Mick Jagger did the vocals at Muscle Shoals, but they did not, go from cradle to grave with each of those songs. There just wasn't enough time to do that.
I mean, do you think they're writing the songs then originally as Jagger and Richards, this great songwriting team, as opposed to the Beatles, where you think everyone else is writing their songs? They've just had a rough sketch, and I guess that happens with a lot of musicians. They'll have a rough sketch, and then the producer's job is to make it into a thing. Do you think it was that, or do you think, because Keith said, I had the sound in my head, so it was almost as if he was just going there and they were just going to put on the top bits. You never see them play anything in the studio.
No.
Do you think the guys there would write and have the backing tracks ready and say, "Here, listen to this, come and record," or do you think it's a Stones project that they've polished off?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of ways you can come at this, right? So when I talk about the Beatles, I say that they did not write all of their own music, and they did not play on all of the recorded tracks. I'm not saying they didn't play on anything, and I'm not saying that they didn't write something. With the Beatles, my take is from 1962 through 1966, they weren't writing anything. That was all done by ghostwriters who were on the Tavistock EMI staff, and that whole process was managed and directed by George Martin and, in all likelihood, Theodore Adorno, right?
Yeah.
So I believe that that's the same exact model that was used for the Rolling Stones, because the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, they emerged together. As you mentioned when we first got started, the good boys of rock and roll were the Beatles and the bad boys were the Rolling Stones. And Memoirs very clearly tells us that both bands were a creation of Tavistock. And both bands were created in order to social engineer society. Now, as far as, the songs being written, I've had people on my YouTube channel comment that they said, there was I guess a video out there where somebody had Graham Parsons' songbook, his diary of songs, and in that book was Wild Horses. And so the question becomes, well, why would that be in Graham Parsons' notes? It would make you at least consider seriously that perhaps he was the person who wrote Wild Horses. So I don't know. I'm sorry.
Keith was hanging out with Graham Parsons quite a lot.
Yes.
And then they were saying that song Country Honk was kind of influenced, because the changed Honky Tonk Women made it more countrified on, I think, Let It Bleed.
Right.
And so that was Graham Parsons' influence, that folk rock thing with the birds and all that stuff. So, yeah, he could have been hanging out with them, and Graham says, "Would they get this?" So just took it, whatever.
Yeah, you just don't know, because as you dig into this, these stories become more and more suspect. As an example, I covered this in the postscript video I put up last night. With Brown Sugar, we're told that Jagger wrote Brown Sugar while he was filming a movie.
Right.
in July of 1969. And this is the same narrative we get with the Beatles, right? That they were able to write songs while they were filming A Hard Day's Night. They were able to write songs, even though they admit that they were in a haze of marijuana during the Help filming, that they were writing songs then. So it's very consistent, right? They put this, and I'm going to say they, I'm talking about the controllers, we're talking about Tavistock, we're talking about their handlers. The stories are all the same. And what they do is they pump their tires up. I'm talking about Jagger, Keith Richards, Lennon McCartney, all of these guys, right? And gals. And they want to give them a mystique. There's an aura of invincibility, that there's something very magical about them. They have abilities that far exceed the abilities of a mere mortal.
Keith Richards, 10 years on heroin and able to do all those gigs and write all those songs,
Yeah.
And they still not need rock and roll legend, etc.
Right. And if we go back to the documentary, Keith tells us that he really didn't have wild horses. Either he had a chorus or it was an idea, right? So whether you believe Jagger or you believe Keith, basically what they're saying is they really didn't have a song at that point. And Keith tells us that he goes to the bathroom at Muscle Shoals studio and he wrote the song sitting on the crapper. Okay. So that I don't know about you, Billy, but that's a ridiculous story. Okay. That clearly did not take place. And it's something that's put out there, and most fans just consume it. They eat it up. They think it's just great. It's a funny story. Well, aren't they amazing that he could just go off on the fly, spur of the moment, need a song, and turn out something like Wild Horses, which is a great song. It's a fabulous song.
And the production of that song as well, as you say, it's like, really, really, we would have took a lot of time to get that right in the background, not just, I've knocked this up, batter it down on the tapes. We've got it, guys, It does seem like...
If we just pick on, Wild Horses, forget about the other two songs. Forget about Brown Sugar and the cover that they did. If we take a look at Wild Horses, what had to happen was once Keith allegedly finished the song while he was in the restroom and he came out, he had to present the song to his bandmates and say, hey, okay, so I finished the song. And then they would have to say, hey, that's fantastic. Let's take a listen. Right. And then he'd have to play it. And then once he plays it, there's going to be dialogue and puts and takes from the other band members about, hey, maybe we should change this up a little bit. Maybe we should tune this lyric to be this instead of what you have, Keith. Then there has to be a rehearsal of the song. And then figuring out how you're going to layer the song with overdubs. This is a process. Songwriting and recording is a process. And what I try to explain to folks is the narrative that we get almost always is they write and record. They completely forget about the rehearsal piece of the process. And the rehearsal part of getting to a recording is very, very important. And so that's never talked about. That's never discussed. And so to think that Wild Horses by itself was done in 2 days, I just don't buy it.
Well, back in the day, a lot of bands used to actually play their new songs on the road to kind of tighten them up and to let the song come out, you know what I mean? Because if you just record it straight away, it's not really live the band on the stage and then it can change. Yeah. These days, with the internet, they don't do that, obviously, because then the song can get out there. But it was part of the kind of the way they done it in those days. Also, I don't know if you know, like, they played the Stones went to the Chess Studios as well, back when Muddy Waters was painting the ceiling, Keith Richards walks in. And then they recorded Satisfaction there and maybe another song. And they says, they were going to take it back home to London to work on it. But somebody just dished it out because it said, the demo, it's almost like a demo version of done, it's quite raw. And then that got pumped out. But that's another one that must have been done dead quick and, without much work on it latterly. And that was the one that exploded them, wasn't it?
Right. So, and there's a story about Keith getting the riff from Satisfaction, right? I mean, something about dreaming or something.
He woke up in the middle of the night And then he can't remember. He's seen the tape recorder was at the end in the morning. He's like, "How's that at the end?" Because and then he's rewound it right back, and the whole tape was empty apart from the wee riff at the start. He says, and that's what became Satisfaction.
Yeah, so that's similar in a way to the story we get about the Beatles yesterday.
Yeah, exactly.
Which came to biological Paul McCartney allegedly in a dream, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I was saying before. We get these stories, and they're really rehashed, and they apply them to various bands. But the Rolling Stones, they were exactly like the Beatles. They were a bar and club band. They were performers. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with being performers. There's nothing wrong with that. Let me just say that. And I also want to say this because a lot of times people misconstrue what I say. They'll say, "Are you saying that the Beatles or the Rolling Stones couldn't play their instruments?" I said, "I never said that. They could play their guitars, they could play their drums, they could play their bass, but their playing skills were not at the level of studio players." And the music industry is in business to make money. It's a business. And they're going to turn around. The cycle time has to be very quick in order to be profitable, to get these songs out. And the way to do that is to have the best set of musicians sitting in the studio at the time to bang these songs out. And this is why I keep explaining to my audience that to truly understand how the music industry worked back in the 1960s and the 1970s is to watch the Wrecking Crew documentary. You can get it on YouTube. You could buy it, from on Amazon. You can watch it on Netflix. It's readily available. It clearly explains how the music industry, what the model was to record songs in pop music back in the 60s and 70s. And then I suggest to my audience that they then watch Hired Gun if you want to get an understanding of how it works from the 1980s going forward. I mean, these bands are still using studio players.
I think Aerosmith, Joe Perry, I think he's never done a guitar solo basically on the record.
No. In Hired Gun, I believe it was Hired Gun, they explained that Joe Perry, in order to play live, had to be taught the guitar parts that were on the record.
Yeah.
And a lot of Aerosmith, fans will go nuts hearing that, and then, Bernard Purdie, who's been saying that he's drummed on 21 Beatles songs since the late 1970s. So it's like, 45 years now. He even has a chapter in his book, Let the Drums Speak. I think he released the book back in 2014. But Bernard, I think it was a 2004 interview, it was sponsored by Red Bull, he explained that 98% of the records that you listen to, those recordings were not recorded by the band members that you think constitute the band. What Bernard was saying is those recordings, those records, those singles were recorded by session players like himself. That's who you're hearing, 98%, right? So yes, and people will ask me, well, what bands do you think didn't have session players? And they would be bands where the band members themselves were session players, right? So as an example, Eric Clapton was a longtime session player. He played on a lot of recordings. So when you hear Clapton records, is that Eric on the recording? Yeah, that's Eric on the recording. When you listen to Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page was doing session work since age 17. And, and I suspect that Jimmy was playing on some of the Beatles songs. I understand some of my subscribers said that he did get credit for playing on some of the Rolling Stones songs. Mm-hmm. You had John Paul Jones doing session work. So Led Zeppelin, in all likelihood, when they went into the studio to record, that's them. And that's because the level of playing of that particular band and other bands where they had session players, those are the guys that were playing on other people's records and laying down the recorded tracks. Now they've moved into a position where not only are they still doing session work, but now they're playing in a band and
Because
applying
basically,
their session work to their band work.
when they're in live, they could be a decent band, but just to not get that metronome type style drummer or the precision that's needed for a record. So if they're going to be off in that and the engineer's having to fix it and retake, it just doesn't make any sense.
Right. Right. Hired Gun, we're told that going back, starting in the 1980s, that many producers, if he couldn't or she couldn't keep time to a click track, they were out.
Yeah, drum machine.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, a drum machine or a drummer that had impeccable timing. So yeah, a drummer that has impeccable timing, great timing was Bernard Purdy as an example, So yeah, so what we wind up with is when you go to a concert, in like 98% of the cases, you're seeing performers. They are the veneer. They are the actors, the performers in front of the curtain. They're the pretty faces. They're the ones with the attitude, if you will, right? That people are watching. It's the entertainment aspect of it, right? You're getting entertained. But behind the scenes, it's an entire machine that puts it all together.
Surely there must be an element of bands coming up, and they make it like Oasis or something like that. The street lads forming together, they come and they make it. Is how much of it can totally be controlled and written for them. Like, you can understand getting recorded, but these bands have got to go out and play these songs live, so they must be up to a certain standard for their own music.
Yeah, it depends upon their level of skill. So a friend of mine is he's a professional sound engineer, and he's been in the business for a long time. And what he explained to me, and he said, Mike, this has been going on for a very, very long time. But there is the use of backstage or offstage musicians that the audience doesn't see, that could be outright playing, let's say, the guitar riffs. They could be complementing, in other words, filling in certain areas where it needs to be bolstered or it needs to be, buffed up if it's alive during a live performance. In fact, I know a person that is connected into the Beatle machine, and I mean, he's not an insider, but he's done work where he was connected into the Beatles. And he wrote me going back about 2 years ago when I found the clip of the Beatles playing in Budokan in Japan in 1966, and John Lennon and George Harrison completely missed the beginning of Day Tripper playing it, yet the riff was being played.
Your
Right?
hands are up here doing this.
Yeah, how can that be? And so he wrote me after I did that presentation, and he said, "You're absolutely right. There are backstage and offstage musicians who are doing the work while the pretty faces, the entertainment aspect of it, is on stage." And he told me that he used to do that work. He didn't say he did it for the Beatles, but he did it for other bands. And he's a great guitar player, so they would just bring him in, and he would be able to sit backstage or off stage and do what he's got to do. The other thing that they do is there's the use of backing tracks. And so what my friend, who's a sound engineer, explained to me is many times they will have a mix of the live performance and the backing track. Now, how much of the backing track you hear or how much of the backing track is put into play is directly related to how good the band is on stage, right? So if they're not real good, then you're going to hear more backing track. If they're decent, then what's going to happen is you're going to get a blend. They're going to do a mix where you're going to hear both. He said in almost all cases, the vocals, there's a backing track for the vocals. And the reason they do that is it's not always because the singer can't sing. It's because what if a microphone goes out? Right? Something like that. So there's this whole there's this whole production piece of this thing, Billy. There's this entire machine behind the music industry and the entertainment industry that nobody sees. And what they do is they point you to the veneer. They point you to the performers, to the entertainers. And so the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were performers. Did they go on stage and, were they able to play these songs? Yeah, they were able to play the songs that they were taught. As an example, pick on the Beatles, right? Because that's my area of focus. The Beatles were taught to play the songs that they took out on the road. Between their original music on their albums, their UK released albums, their official releases between Please Please Me and Revolver, and the singles that they released during the 1962 through 66 period, there were 90 songs. Let's say 90 songs. And of the 90 songs, I counted them up, and I did a show with Ofer Zevi, who's another, he's a great researcher, Beatles researcher. The Beatles maybe played around 25 of those 90 songs.
And as they're releasing great tracks and great albums, they're still going back and playing ones of the first albums or cover versions and stuff like that. It doesn't make any sense.
So you have to ask yourself, what happened to the other 65 songs? If you allegedly wrote them, you allegedly played them on the records, why were these songs why were more songs not played? And why were the Beatles, as an example, why did they keep falling back on covers? Dizzy Miss Lizzie, Kansas City, and stuff like that. Why were they doing that? So I believe it's the same thing with the Rolling Stones. I'm going to take Memoirs' statement that the Stones were also created by Tavistock at the same time that the Beatles were created. And, I haven't found anything to disprove that, especially when you understand the role that music, especially pop music, plays in the social engineering of society. Why would I believe that the Rolling Stones were organic and natural, and that they were actually the ones writing their own music and playing on all of their recorded tracks? I don't believe it. Now, is that to say that the Rolling Stones didn't write some of their music and didn't play on some of their recorded tracks? Yeah, it's possible that they did. But when all is said and done, the way the music industry works is it's like what I said before. They've got a product to put out, and it has to be of the highest caliber. It's got to be very polished and produced. They're not going to waste time with musical talent that doesn't cut it. And that's not a knock on anybody. I mean, honestly, if I took my songs to a major label, they would probably tell me that they would replace my guitar work with a studio guy, because they want, as close as they can get, they want perfection. That's what they want, because it's a business. It's not like some kind of social club. It's a business, and they're there to make money, and not only make money, but they're there to support an agenda, to social engineer. That's what they do.
Yeah, just as you're talking there's a female singer, Katie Tunstall, it might have been this female singer who took her songs originally to the record company, and she says she was horrified, kind of thing, with what they'd done with them, and then because it wasn't her true kind of artistic version, but she says, would you change it and go back to just putting your songs out? And she said, probably not, because what they'd done to them to change them that much that the public wanted to buy them, and she's become an artist, but she's lost her original kind of identity. And I guess that must happen to a lot. These record companies will see a bit of potential, see the eagerness of people wanting to make it, and says, right, well, you're a commodity. I've heard the same thing in the comedy world. Somebody kind of says, he's not interested in making money, and the agent says, well, that's a shame, because you're a commodity and I can sell you whatever, but ultimately it's all about money, isn't it?
Yeah, they take artists that are they're not in the club, they're not in secret societies, but they scour the landscape for talent and skill, and for performers or entertainers or people with creative ability who are songwriters, as an example, that they can exploit, that they can use, so that they, meaning the record label and the machine, can benefit.
Yeah.
So this happens all the time. Like Janis Joplin comes to mind. Janis Joplin was not on the scene very long, but if you take a look into Janis Joplin's history, she was exploited to the hilt. You know, um, but this is what they do, and they don't care. They when I talk about I'm talking about the labels who are
I think it
part
was
of the
Albert.
controlling system. They don't care.
I think it was Albert Grossman, wasn't it? She was in Big Brother and the holding company, and actually, well, the story goes that they weren't very good in the studio, and it was causing lots of tensions in the band because they couldn't get it right. And then Albert's at the side saying, you're the real star, come on with me, and that's why she left and done a few solo albums. But yeah, the industry kind of used her, chewed her up, and spat her out, basically.
Yeah. Yep, that's what they did. They used and abused her, and so this happens all the time. And as I mentioned in my postscript video, Billy, these entertainers, these celebrities, these artists, these songwriters, these bands, and these musicians, they are all put in place so that the population idolizes them. It's idol worship is really what it is, and I refer to them as the lower tier or lower gods, right? So what happens is when you idolize bands, and like I idolized the Beatles. I was a total Beatle fanatic. I was Beatle nut job, and I idolized the Beatles and John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And when you do that, what you're doing is you're putting both your non-physical or spiritual energy into their bucket. I mean, into their funnel. You're actually disempowering yourself, and you're taking your energy and your empowerment and you're handing it over to an outside entity. You're no longer your own authority. They are now the authority. And I'm not just talking about the bands. The bands and the artists are a conduit to the controller's methods of steering and controlling consciousness.
Well, the Beatles
And
were LSD, obviously, and Paul McCartney interview, and if you're following the band and they've led you like they do with Hannah Montana, whatever her name is, and comes Miley Cyrus, taking from the innocent, sweet ones, stepping stone technique, or they're changing, we'll change with them. Next thing they're taking LSD, next thing everyone else. So they're the gods, they're doing it, so we'll do it.
right, that's right. So there's also the physical energy piece of it. So and the example I use in my postscript video is money, right? So money, you have to physically work to receive money, right? You go to your job, you do your job, and then you get paid. And then what do? Well, what do a lot of people do? Well, they take that money that they earned from their physical labor, their physical energy, and then they spend it on that merchandise, right? The band's merchandise, on their CDs, on their concerts and stuff like that. And so you're taking both your non-physical and your physical energy, and you are handing it over to a controlling mechanism, a controlling apparatus that then takes that energy, right? The consciousness, if you will, because they've got people so focused on these genres of music and these artists and these musicians, there's all of this worship that's taking place. And then they can steer the consciousness. These people will come out and say, you should do this, you should do that, you should dress like me, you should look like me, you should play music like me, right? And what's happening is people are subconsciously following their lead. I mean, I put a video up on my community tab. I'm surprised it's still up with some of the comments that are there. I'm surprised that YouTube didn't take it down. But it's the Rolling Stones doing a public service announcement, a PSA, for getting the jet.
All right, okay. And I've seen Elvis done that. He was the first one to promote it. The
Yeah,
polio.
right. So then we have to ask ourselves, how did this anti-establishment band, the Rolling Stones, these rebels, these bad boys, how is it they all of a sudden, well, over time, right, have now become proponents of the establishment and pushing the establishment agenda?
Oh yeah.
How did that happen? Did they have some kind of conversion over the years, or were they always part of the system And it was a process of evolving very methodically over time to get people acclimated and conditioned to be at a certain place a number of years later. And that's what they do, right? The change that they implement, and I'm talking about the controllers, I'm talking about however you want to, whatever you want to call them, whatever label, the New World Order, One World Order. Everything they do is very methodical and it's very incremental. They're not going to just throw the switch and boom, it was this way yesterday and now it's this way today. It has to be a process of acclimation where people assimilate the change into their life. And that's the engineering part of it. And, you know, and most people are not even aware that they have made very significant changes in their lifestyle or their belief system or their values. They're not even aware of it. It just kind of went with the flow and it evolved over time. And this is what the music industry does. The music industry helps to make that change over time by feeding different parts of the population different social engineering initiatives. In my video, I mentioned that there's different genres of music. Each genre of music is out there intentionally because they know that one size doesn't fit all. So they have to appeal to different audiences. But all of these mainstream genres of music are all connected with a goal, is a strategy to achieve a certain mindset and a certain value system and belief system of the population at some point down the line where the controllers believe they will reach a point where it's a point of no return as far as the population goes. In other words, now you're here and there's no going back.
Well, so they do with everything, don't they? All the psyops.
Right. So, so that's what's going on. And people just they just have a hard time believing that music, which is something that's good, right? We love music. I love music. Can result in something that's not good, something that's negative or bad. So that's why it's a big tool in a toolbox, because people don't want to believe that. They won't accept it. And so they think anytime somebody talks about how certain bands are there to social engineer, they reject it. Oh, you're crazy, Mike. You're absolutely out of your mind. You're kidding me. That music made me happy. And so I'm going to continue to listen to it. And you're just off your rocker, But if you go back to where in the United States, I'm sure it's the same thing in the UK, Billy, if you go back 60 years ago to 1960, that's the stake I put in the ground, right? And you take a look at where the world has gone in 6 decades. I mean, it's an unbelievable transformation.
Yeah.
You can't argue that nothing changed.
Right? It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Just to talk about leading people, just remember the Beatles just grew their hair just that wee bit longer, just a mop top, and even that was causing a stir back then.
Right.
Oh my God. And then people started to do that, and then obviously the 60s came and it was men with long hair all of a sudden. So that's like the feminization of men, you could say. It's all the agenda, isn't it? Everything they do. I watched a James Deal documentary recently, and he was like really popular at the end of the 80s, and he just came starting to make it, and then all of a sudden grunge came along, Pearl Jam and that, and basically the record company just got this pile of CDs, and his one's in it. Said, "See all these groups, bucket,
right?
They're done now. This is what we're selling now." So he had to come to terms with that, And fortunately, some people can build up their own thing, but a lot of them just get swept. Like there's this particular thing. There's lots of bands come up. One or two might make it to continue. The rest next. You don't serve the purposes anymore. And there's also the guy talking about putting in the music. Remember John Todd, who David Crosby died recently, and this guy John Todd in the 60s, he was part of the music industry, and he says that David Crosby was like the wizard in the Laurel Canyon area, and he used to do black magic spells into the master tapes. So then that spell is on every record.
Yeah.
And people these days are saying there's all kinds of subliminal messages on these records and stuff, so we're not even hearing You know, they're putting out music. You think you're getting music, but what else are you listening to? We don't actually know.
Yeah, and the backmasking is another example of that. If you play Stairway to Heaven backwards, Led Zeppelin is clearly praising Satan. It's not even ambiguous. You can hear it if you play the song backwards, which is easy these days. All you need to do is load it up into a sound application like Audacity, and then there's an effects menu, and you just click reverse, and it just completely reverses the song for you. Back in the day, you had to spin the record
Yeah.
backwards, but you don't have to do that anymore.
Bill Hickstroke, if you're spinning records backwards, you
Yeah.
are something. No.
Yeah, I mean, even when with the Beatles music, if you read the memoirs of Billy Shears, Billy, through Tom Harriet, he explains the layered meanings within the Beatles songs, and um, all of the Beatles songs from like 1966 forward had to do with the death of Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
And so that's layered into the songs. And when you think about it, that's creepy. Okay, it's creepy because what they're really doing is they are weaving in occultism into the music. And even though on the surface most people are not going to get it, it's the intent of the occultist to have whatever it is they've done, to have it have as much exposure as they possibly can. So when people continue to play the records over and over again, when people continue to sing the songs over and over again, in the mind and in the practices of the occultists, that is continuing to strengthen the ritual.
Yeah.
It's continuing to reinforce the magic. And and I know folks are listening to this think it's crazy. It doesn't matter whether you think it's crazy or not. It's what they think. It's what they're doing. You see,
Well, they're doing a
what they're
magic
doing.
spell in a record, and you're singing that song all the time. It's got like there's what even abracadabra or something like that. So abracadabra, whatever.
Abracadabra, yes.
There's hidden meanings in all these words and language. Even there's a Britney Spears song, "If You Seek Amy," is Fuck me. So
Right.
people are just putting that out. It's not. There's these subliminal messages and things that we don't know until they're pointed out. So I was going to say something. Yeah, the whole agenda is like that. To me, it's the Aleister Crowley element. What part does he have to play in this mystical, this transformation of society? He seems to be the guy that's inspired, shall we say, a lot of this new age and the new religion and do what you will, almost the kind of anarchy that's not real anarchy. It's people think they can do anything without consequences, or and people say Aleister Crowley's misinterpreted, and he's actually not as bad as they make out and stuff like that. What's your view on Aleister Crowley and his influence on the music world?
Crowley's an interesting character, and I know there are folks, there are people in the alternative research community who believe that he wasn't very important. He was a carnival barker. He's just he's out there as a distraction. But I disagree with that. Crowley was very much tied into the elite system. He was working with British intelligence going back to World War One. There's a great book out there. It's Secret Agent 666. If you get a chance to read that book, it lays it all out as far as his involvement in British intelligence. And some would argue that even though he was getting on in age, his intelligence work also went into the Second World War. He was an occultist. He was an accomplished occultist and magician. It's interesting, I have a person that I converse with every once in a while, and they are very, very knowledgeable in the occult. And he said, Crowley knew a lot. He didn't know everything, they said, but he knew a lot. And Crowley's influence, in my mind, can't be understated. It all goes back to Egypt. That's, that's where he received his channeling from his spirit guide Awas to write the book of the law. And the book of the law is really the holy text of his religion, Thelema. And that's where we get "Do as thou wilt." And Crowley and Crowleyites, Thelemites will say that "do as thou wilt" does not mean that you can go around abusing people and hurting people and all that stuff. That's what they will say. But that's an interesting take on it, because Crowley, in one of his papers, I think it was book 77, I think it was, he clearly says at the end, anybody that gets in the way of you living your will, you have a right to kill them.
Right.
Okay. So Crowleyites and Crowley will say that the current system, or the system that was in place, is oppressive and it's rules laden, and that is keeping humanity from being liberated and unshackled. And we need to live free, and we need to follow our will, and do whatever it is that we want to do in life without being constrained or inhibited by some patriarchal system. So Crowley, his eons, he had, there was the eon of Isis, but then there was the eon of Osiris, which loosely correlates with the Piscean age. And then he was putting in place his eon of Horus, which we can overlay the age of Aquarius with that. I mean, they're not exact matches as far as beginning and end, but there is significant overlap between, as an example, his eon of Osiris and the Piscean age, and his eon of Horus and the age of Aquarius, which is what we have entered into. A lot of occultists will say that the formal start of the age of Aquarius began on December 12th of 2012. And that was what all the Mayan calendar hoopla was about, right? It was camouflaged under the Mayan calendar, but what they were really saying it was the end of the Piscean age and the beginning of the age of Aquarius. Crowley will say that his age, or his eon of Horus, began in the early 1900s, and then there's a slow, gradual ramping up into that age.
And Blavatsky and all that kind of stuff. Just
Yeah, right. Going back to all of that, and so Crowley was very, very influential that way, and Memoirs tells us that many within the Pyramid of Power are adherents to Crowley's religion of Thelema, which is Luciferianism. Okay, so when people say that Luciferianism doesn't have a holy text, I would argue that that's not true. That the basis of modern day Luciferianism, what we're seeing today, is entrenched in Crowley. It's entrenched in his work, his book of the law, his writings, his philosophy, his spirituality, and so on. Right. So that's what we're seeing. And Thelemites, Crowleyites, Luciferians, they believe that you must develop your inner will. That's first and foremost. And then you create an external world that mirrors your internal will. It's not the other way around. Whereas most of the population do it the other way around. They take the external environment, the external world, and then they assimilate that and they bring that in. And they think that that's who they are on the inside. And some of them are not even smart enough to understand what your will is, right? But I'll just say that becomes their will. But it's not your will.
Like
what you're doing,
I'm a
what you
Rangers fan, you know, but that's been given to you, so you identify as that. You go,
exactly. So what you've done is you've actually consented to accepting somebody else's will and living an existence in accordance to what they have laid out. And when I say they, I'm talking about the controllers. And since the controllers' philosophy of Thelema, of Crowleyism, of Luciferianism, says that the establishment of your inner will is the most important thing you can do. That's what they're doing. So when we take a look at what's going on in the world, that's a manifestation of their will, of what they want to do. And what they want to do is they want to tear down the existing structure, because what they really are is they are Egyptian mystery zealots. They're Egyptian mystery fanatics. That's their religion. And they believe in order to change, in order to make change, transformation, you have to go through alchemical stages. So the Nigredo stage is what we're going through now. Nigredo is essentially the obliteration, the taking out of existing structures, because the alchemists and the occultists believe that you cannot do anything new if remnants of the old still exist. So the old systems, the old ways, the old belief systems have to be eradicated. They have to be erased.
hence Christianity getting taken down.
Yes, right. So Christianity was in the way. That's why the Illuminati, or the controllers, whatever name you want to give them, they declared war on Christianity on September 11th of 1962. I don't see any level of humanity at the top of this pyramid. I really don't. I mean, it's interesting, you know, I'm not even really sure what it is they're looking for at the end of the day. I mean, would they want the entire earth for, like, what, for 100 people? You know what I'm saying?
It is crazy what's
It
going
is
on.
crazy when you try to factor in and you try to understand what is the ultimate what's the ultimate end state with all of this. Where do they really want to be with all of this?
Maybe there's lots of
It's kind of
reptiles.
mind-boggling.
Maybe there's lots of reptiles under the ground, and they can't come up until all the humans are wiped off, or else we'll attack them. So maybe they're just having a clear up above ground. So
Well, look, I mean, you can't discount. I won't discount that there are negative beings and entities that are at play here, because clearly, in my mind, the nastiness, the ugliness, the despicability that takes place on any given day didn't originate from a human. So there's got to be, at the very least, some type of mind pathogen or parasitical force that has commandeered the minds of these people that who we refer to as the controllers. I mean, you can't discount that that's going on.
I think 100% is going on. As long as these people who get schizophrenic voices in their head, that's not like a chemical imbalance. That's demons inside their head. And
Yeah,
these guys do these satanic rituals. We know that, and all the blood and all the craziness. So these entities are flying around, and they've opened themselves up. They're probably taking cocaine or whatever, and meth and all these things. And people's heads are getting filled with demonic entities, to the point where their own thinking mind isn't their own anymore. And I
no,
think that's what's these controllers. They're actually a demonic entity who hates humanity and wants to us to suffer as much as possible. That's our leaders right now. you know.
yeah, yeah, and these leaders, right? They're not even leaders. They're just puppets. As I said before, they will be discarded as soon as they're no longer serving the purpose that they were intended to serve, right? So then it's boom, just kick them off the table. But there's definitely some parasitical force that has infiltrated the minds of these people. In Twin Peaks 2017, that's the David Lynch series,
Yeah.
right? So the
Watch
original
it.
was in the 1990s, and then 25 years later, he did the 2017 version. There's an episode within the series, the 2017 series, where David shows that there was they detonated the atomic bomb, a test. I think it was the Trinity test site. And when that happened, there was a chain reaction. And that chain reaction altered the very fabric of existence. And when that happened, it opened up portals, doorways, whatever you want to call them, to let entities into this reality that are not supposed to be here. Okay,
That
now,
was that the Jack Parsons one? There's a couple of guys, Jack Parsons and a guy with Scientology. They done a similar one, and something happened like that as well.
Okay, so I'm not familiar with the Jack Parsons, who, by the way, was a disciple of Aleister Crowley, right?
All right.
Jack Parsons, whenever he did some kind of rocket launch, used to recite the Hymn of Pan. Okay, so, but Lynch, who is high up the ladder, I believe David Lynch. It's like there's always revelation of the method, right? They tell you the truth. It's hidden in plain sight. So I remember I was watching that. I watched it twice, that episode, and the first time I'm like, well, what is he telling us here? And so in the series Twin Peaks, for those of you who haven't watched it, there's a very evil being entity whose name is Bob.
Yeah.
And during that sequence where the bomb is detonated, these orbs are coming toward Earth, and one of the faces in the orb was Bob's face.
Yeah.
Right? So David's telling us that there are entities here that shouldn't be here.
Right.
And possibly, that's the reason why we're in this battle. It is a spiritual battle. It's a battle between good and evil. It really is. I mean, I know it sounds oversimplistic, but that's really what it is. And the problem that we have with evil, because I was asked this question years ago, they said, why is it that good has so many problems overcoming evil? I said, it's because evil has no boundaries. Whereas good people have boundaries. I mean, you and I would say, well, I'm not going to do that. That's wrong, right?
Yep.
However, if you're evil, you're going to say, yeah, I'm going to do that and more. They play by a rule that says that if you consent, even if it's not, outward consent, in other words, you don't speak up. So
yeah,
if you don't say anything, then we're just going to assume that you're okay with this, right? So that's and they believe that somehow covers their bases. I do not believe that covers their bases. I don't think they are covered from a karmic perspective at all, because you got that consent in a deceitful way.
Yeah.
Okay, you could say all you want about you put it out there, it's hidden in plain sight. But no, you encoded it, and you knew when you put it out there that very few, if anybody, was going to understand. Okay, that doesn't cover you from a karmic perspective. So I whenever I hear that, I just take that and toss it out the window. I think they're just fooling themselves.
I think, to me, if everything shut down, all this information went and the internet gone, people just living, naturally, it'd be a lot simpler, wouldn't it? There's too much shit the human brain is getting bombarded with to try and make sense of, really. It's impossible. That's part of the design as well, information overload. So
Yeah.
you're not going to have time to just live a simple life and go for a walk and enjoy your own thoughts and, that kind of thing.
That's what you have to do. That's what my wife and I do. We go on our walks, and we talk almost every day about keeping it simple and focusing on what's really important in life, which is, our life together, our grandchild, our children, family and friends. You really have to do that. Now, you can't walk around oblivious, to what it is they're trying to do, but you also cannot submerge yourself so deep into their toxic pool that you're going to drown in it. And I see this happen to a lot of folks in the truth movement or the alternative research community, where they almost become lunatics. They're just so invested in it, and they're raging and all of this stuff, and that's not healthy. That's not healthy. You know, you have to have a balanced, healthy disposition in order to do the work, to best help people, because, you know, otherwise you're going to be, you know, you're going to look like a lunatic as you're trying to express yourself, and that's just going to turn people off. So you have to have balance in your life. You know, people get brainwashed into believing that all of these divides actually exist. They don't exist. They're all illusionary, and the only way they exist is if you take the bait and you embrace what it is, the garbage that they're feeding you. As soon as everybody just abandons that stuff, you know, I think we talked about it before, just turn that television set off. Just turn it off and go find something else to do. Go find something more productive to do. Go in your yard, do some gardening, go, you know, do some farming, go write some music, go paint, go write some poetry, go write a book, spend time with your kids, your grandchildren, spend time with your pets, go for a walk. Do all of these things. Well, you know, why are you sitting in front of that stupid television set, taking in cable news at 24/7 and thinking that that's the real world? That is not the real world. People have just become just so oblivious, and they're so dumbed down, they're so thick that they really can't have an intelligent conversation.
No, they can't.
They can't. They cannot.
They can't. That's the problem. It's not capable of it. It's just,
Yeah.
you know, we think we're kind of normal, but we're so far removed from your average TV watching person who can only talk about the football or the latest transfer, or, you know, some. In the past, people used to talk about the same TV shows, but now, because of the internet and there's so many channels, there's not a lot of people watching the same TV shows, you know?
Yeah.
Because when there's only 4 channels, it'd be like, you know, did you see that last night? But so the conversation is even more banal.
You can't even have, you know, my wife and I talk about this too, friends, right? So, you know, 20, 30 years ago, whatever, you know, you had a bunch of friends, a circle of friends. Well, that circle of friends has dwindled significantly because there's two realities. There's the reality that you and I live in, where we see what's going on and we understand it. And then there's the reality, which unfortunately is the majority of the population, which is completely detached and dissociated. So how is it that you're going to retain any number of friends? I mean, what are you going to talk about?
Well,
I don't want to talk about the football game.
Yeah, you learn that when you start to wake up. You know, say, what about this? And they don't want to talk about it. Like, oh, I can't really talk about football now because I know about all this shit.
Yeah, right. You know, it's you just can't talk about the stuff that they talk about. And at some point, you know, you'll meet people that are part of your tribe. That's how it works. And you know, it's how you and I connected, really. And you know, and even though the technology many times is used against us, there's a lot of good that comes out of the technology, because people from across the world are able to communicate. And you and I can have a conversation, and we could say, I could tell you what's going on here, you could tell me what's going on there, and then we could see that it's the same thing that's going on.
Yep.
What does that mean? That means there's a master plan, right? There's a worldwide control system in place. That's what that means. So the technology has allowed us to be able to confirm and validate a lot of what was only suspicion going back, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
When people would write books, or there would be some article on some internet page and stuff like that. Today, in real time, we could talk about and validate what it is that is going on across the world. And it's the same script, same talking points. Everything's the same.
Let's just go back and roll up with the Rolling Stones a wee bit, since I started with that.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, the Rolling Stones, fucking 50 years or whatever they've been at it, and do you know, I think they must be getting sick to death. Well, that's why Bill Wyman left, apparently, because Satisfaction, Jumpin' Jacks Flash, Brown Sugar, this band was so brilliant back in the day. What stopped them making classic after classic throughout the years, forevermore? Surely if you get to a certain level of songwriting, you can pump out those ones. I mean, we've not had a new album for them in 10 years or whatever, and apparently 6 years ago they said they were sitting on a cracker, but just need a few more tunes. You know, first of all, it just shows you it's a machine, because they've got these big, huge mega tours all the time. Are they really doing that for the love of the money and the love of the fans? There must be some good in playing to big fans all the time, but like I went to see Bob Dylan's recent tour, and it was absolutely brilliant. Just him and the piano, he creates a new sound all the time, and it was jazz, and I don't know, something suitable for his age and something new that he's done, his new album, But the Stones is just like Satisfaction chugging out another 7-minute version of that. It's like, you could play smaller theatres and be more intimate and be more interesting where you're at. It's rather than just pumping that all the time. So that's one aspect of it.
Well, the Stones, they made the Faustian bargain. That's what Brian Jones was all about. And, it's like what Bob Dylan said. He's got to live up to his contract with the chief commander, right? That's the what he said to.
Frail when he's standing there, he was like waving goodbye at 81 years old. He's quite a frail old guy now.
Yeah. So in 60 Minutes with Ed Bradley, he talked about, the deal he cut with the chief commander. Who's he talking about? Who do you think he's talking about? So, the Rolling Stones made that same deal. The Who made the deal. That's why, Keith Moon passed away. It's why John Bonham died with Led Zeppelin. So we can list band after band after band. They make these deals. It's the deal with the devil. It's the Faustian bargain. They make these pacts. And, for some of them, they die young. Others, the deal is this: you keep pumping it out forever, until you're 80, 85 years old, and we chuck you in the ground. And, that's the deal that the Stones made. That's why they're still doing what they're doing. That's why Billy's still doing what he's doing. Quote Paul McCartney, it's Billy Shears. They make these deals, and they have got to live up to these deals, these pacts that they make. There's no getting out from under it.
I don't think. I think in the Freemasons, the higher up you go, the more you get tortured if you reveal it. But probably they've got your family members will suffer as well, So it's not just on them. They do that quite a lot, don't they?
I'm sorry. What was the point?
They say to the artist, well, if you don't do what you're doing, your family member will get it. So they up the ante. It's not just you; it's your children or your partner. So that makes it more.
Well, look, I think that's what happened to Eric Clapton when he lost his son Connor.
Aye.
Okay. I don't like saying things like this, but where Eric's gone with his career and so on, and knowing that these Faustian bargains really do exist and they do engage in this stuff. It's not always you or a band member. It can be a family member.
Robert Plant lost a son. Keith Richards lost a son.
Yes. Yes.
So
when you make those pacts, and a lot of times I'm sure that they are not even really aware of the significance and how serious it is, because they're young when they make these pacts, right?
Yeah.
They think, maybe they're doing it on a lark. It doesn't mean anything, but these rituals are conducted by the priesthood. And that doesn't mean they show up in a robe and candles and all that stuff. Right? They start reciting whatever incantations they say, and whatever else they've got to do, and that's it. You signed your fate.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but that's why the Stones, they're doing what they're doing.
That's one thing I was wanting to mention as well. Just Keith Richards, rock god, and that. It's so cool, Keith. Like this. But in that show's video, when you hear him tell the story, and it's kind of false, you can kind of see him. You've just got no guy that's saying, there's Keith. Maybe he's lying. Maybe that's just a facade. Maybe you kind of look in his face and say, is he playing the game there? It's like at the end of it, he kind of looks away, and you're just wondering in his own head, fuck, I'm such a bullshitter.
Well, even when he said at Muscle Shoals, he says, we were never that prolific, ever.
Aye.
Right? And then he said, well, and that's saying something about the Rolling Stones. And then he mumbled something. He mumbled a lot, right? So, but what Keith was saying was, and I do think he was throwing a clue out there. Maybe he was masterfully speaking, hey, yeah, we're saying we did this in 2 days. We've never actually ever did anything like this in 2 days. And then, and the fact that we did it in 2 days, that's really saying something, because that's not the norm. That's not normally how this works. Okay.
Yeah.
So, it's possible that he was throwing the clues out there. But whether he was intentionally throwing a clue out there or unintentionally, to me, it spoke volumes. He was saying that we didn't do this. The story that we told you, or the story you're being told, is not completely true.
Yeah.
That was my takeaway.
You just get that feeling of it. Just like you just get a feeling he's a little bit uneasy, or it's just he's bullshitting to a certain extent. And this Keith Richards big story, it's not just Keith or whatever the band. There's mega people behind him all making it happen, and he's a bit player in it almost.
Yeah. And just the way he's dressed and all. I mean, they've got their costumes on, because they're really costumes, and that's there to bring people in, to pull them in. It's the allure of, the rebel, the hard driving, hard drinking, drugging rocker, and people like, yeah, isn't Keith the cool guy, and I don't know. It's amazing what people get pulled into.
Yeah, rock and roll, it's brilliant on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's probably done a lot of damage throughout the years. It's kind of, but I still go to gigs, I still enjoy bands. Even Bob Dylan, I know he's like the Chief Commander, but I thoroughly enjoyed the gig, So
that's the thing. There's a lot of good music out there. There's a lot of good music out there, So I'm not going to say that I don't continue to listen to music. I do, but I listen to it knowing what's really going on.
Yeah. That's it. And you've done a great job exposing lots of stuff. It was great to chat to you again, Mike. Would you like to tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, and thanks for having me on again, Billy. So, folks, just go to my hub website. It's Sage of Quay, SAGEOFQUAY.com, sageofquay.com. All of my links are there, including the links to my music. And I'm looking to release another album probably within the next, I would say, 2 months or so.
All right, that's cool. We look forward to that. Enjoyed your last album, and you made a single. Was that just a one-off track recently for your partner?
Yep, and I did one after that where my wife and I wrote it together, and that'll be on the album. And I'm working on the 10th song as we speak. So what I've been doing over time is releasing singles.
That's right. I remember now.
Instead of waiting like 2-3 years for
Hollow Moon and stuff. That was Hollow Moon was your previous one. Was it?
Hollow Moon was my second one, and Leaving Dystopia was the first album.
Breathe and stuff like that. Is that going to be in the new one?
Breathe will be on the new one, yeah.
Right, okay. So
Breathe was the first single I released. That will be on the third album.
Yeah, well, sure, it'll be a good album because I've heard quite a few tracks on it, and I've enjoyed them a lot. Enjoy your work,
both
you, musically and on the web. So thanks for your time, Mike, and everyone else. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers now. Bye bye.